The neon sign above the rusted nail had been missing its N for going on 3 years. Nobody fixed it, not because the men inside couldn't, because somehow a bar called the Rusted Ale felt about right for the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club. It suited them the way old boots suit a man who has walked enough miles to stop caring what they look like and has started caring only about whether they hold. Harlan County, Kentucky sat in the eastern hill country like something the rest of America had decided to forget. The mountains were beautiful if you weren't trapped inside them. The coal money had dried up 2 decades back, and what remained was a stubborn kind of pride, the kind of loyalty that you either carried in your bones from birth or you never understood at all. Towns like Harlan didn't grow. They endured. And the people who stayed, the ones who didn't chase jobs to Louisville or Cincinnati or Atlanta, they endured right along with it, season after season, their roots going deeper into the ground, the way roots do when there is nowhere else for them to go. The Rusted Nail sat at the far end of Cutter's Road, a quarter-mile past a grain store that had been shuttered since 2008. The parking lot was gravel and cracked asphalt, and the ghosts of painted lines that had given up years ago. The front door was solid oak, scarred from decades of hands and shoulders and occasional disagreements that nobody recorded. The window had a diagonal crack sealed with electrical tape that someone replaced every few months without being asked and without comment. Nobody ever mentioned it. Nobody needed to. There was an understanding in the Iron Wolves that certain things got maintained because they were worth maintaining, and the explanation was the maintenance itself. Inside on a Friday night, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the low amber warmth of hanging lights strung above the bar. The jukebox in the corner played something with a slow guitar, a song that was old when most of the men in the room were still young enough not to know the difference between sentiment and truth. Pool tables stretched down the left side of the room. The bar ran the length of the right wall, dark wood worn smooth by 10,000 elbows over 30 years of use. Bottles lined the shelves behind the bar, in no particular order, selected more for loyalty to a brand than any consideration of aesthetics. A Friday night at the Rusted Nail meant the whole chapter was in. Grady Briggs stood at the near pool table, rolling the cue ball slowly between his massive hands. The men called him Tank, and they called him that for reasons that were immediately obvious to anyone who shared a room with him. He was not tall in the traditional sense, but he was wide in a way that suggested he had been built from something denser than ordinary material, like the same geological process that made the mountains outside had worked on him too. His forearms were the circumference of most men's calves. His neck was a column of muscle that had been tested enough times to know its own strength. His hands, when he set the cue ball down on the green felt, did so with a surprising gentleness that did not match his dimensions. That was the thing about Grady Briggs that people who didn't know him tended to miss entirely. He had the capacity for great force and the preference for great restraint. He was the club's sergeant at arms, and he took that responsibility seriously in both directions. He could stop trouble before it started, and he could finish it himself if the situation genuinely required. He knew the difference between those two things, and the knowing was what made him good at the job. He had been with the Iron Wolves for 19 years. He had a daughter of his own, 17 now, who texted him occasionally and came to his house on holidays and had inherited his tendency toward silence and her mother's tendency toward making everything from scratch. He thought about her sometimes when the bar was loud and he was quiet inside it. He thought about the world she was going to have to navigate. He thought about whether he had done enough to make sure she knew how to navigate it. He pushed the cue ball gently to the far cushion and watched it roll back. Clint Pruitt Razor, to everyone in the room, sat sideways on a bar stool with his elbow on the bar and a glass of dark beer in front of him that he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. He had a long jaw and deep-set eyes and the expression of a man who was always calculating something just below the surface of whatever face he was showing you. He was the youngest of the senior members, mid-40s, with hands that were never entirely still. Small movements, fingers against the bar rail, a thumb against the edge of his glass. Some men got quiet when they were thinking. Razor got sharper. He would go from perfectly still to in motion before most men had registered that anything had changed. He had grown up in a house on a street not far from here, a detail he did not discuss and that most of the chapter did not know. But he knew the streets of Harlan County the way a man knows his own face, not from looking at it, but from living inside it, intimately, involuntarily. The geography of the place was written into him in a way that no amount of leaving had erased. He had left at 18. He had covered a lot of ground since. He had come back 12 years ago and discovered that home was not what you left. It was what followed you. Wes Decker sat at the bar itself, nursing something amber over ice and watching the room with the patient attention of a man who had learned that most of what mattered happened in peripheral vision. They called him Hawk for reasons that went back 15 years and a specific incident in Nevada that he never talked about and didn't need to. He was methodical and observant, and he had a quality that was rarer than people recognized in it. He could be in a room and genuinely disappear from it, not because he was invisible, but because he knew how to hold himself in a way that drew no one's eye. He was the member most likely to see something coming before anyone else registered the direction. He had a way of positioning himself in rooms that gave him sight lines other people didn't notice they'd given up. His coffee sat beside the amber drink, both going cold. He wasn't there for the drinks. He was there for the company and the quiet rightness of Friday night with the chapter around him. Aldrich Reese sat alone at the table in the far corner. Phantom. The name had been given to him early, and it had stuck with the inevitability of things that are simply true. He was lean in the way of a man for whom food had always been fuel rather than pleasure, and he moved through the world with the economy of someone who had learned over a long time that most motion was wasted. His face was angular, his eyes were dark and watchful, and he could sit in a chair for 2 hours and appear not to have moved at all, though you could be certain he had seen and registered everything that happened in the room during those 2 hours. He noticed things that other men's eyes slid over. A serial number on something that shouldn't have one. The way a man favored a particular side when he stood. Initials scratched into something with a blade. He had a coffee cup in front of him that had gone cold, and he was turning a coin between 2 fingers. The way a man does when his mind is actively working on something that his mouth has not yet decided to address. He had a small notebook in his jacket that was half filled with observations written in a compressed, precise hand. He had filled many such notebooks over the years. He never threw them away. And then there was Marcus Webb, Duke. He stood at the end of the bar, apart from the general noise of the room without being separated from it. He was 58 years old with a face that had been shaped by time and weather and a great deal of living that had not all been easy and none of it had been soft. His hair had gone fully gray in his mid-40s, and he had stopped resisting it sometime around the point when he understood that resistance was energy better spent elsewhere. He was not the largest man in the room. He was not the loudest. But when he moved, the room adjusted around him in the unconscious way that rooms adjust around things that carry real weight. He had been leading the Iron Wolves for 11 years, and in those 11 years, he had made exactly the number of enemies you would expect and exactly the number of allies you would need, and he had buried 2 of his brothers and stood at both funerals without looking away from the caskets, because he believed that looking away was a form of leaving. And leaving was the thing he was most determined never to do again. He was holding a glass of water. He had switched to water after his daughter died. He did not talk about his daughter. Not to the chapter, not to anyone. There was a photograph in his wallet, a young woman with his eyes and her mother's smile, the photograph worn soft at the edges from 12 years of being taken out and looked at on the nights when sleep didn't come, and putting it away didn't help either. Her name had been Lori. She had been 26 years old. She had been 26 years old. She had been in a relationship with a man named Darren Stoll, and Darren Stoll had been the kind of man who worked very hard to seem reasonable in public and saved his real self for behind closed doors. Marcus had not known how bad it was. Or more precisely, and this was the version of the truth he returned to in the dark hours, the one he could not make himself stop returning to, he had known that something was wrong and had told himself it wasn't his place to interfere. She was an adult. It was her life. He had believed those things with the ease of a man who is telling himself something comfortable. Right up until the phone call on a Tuesday afternoon in April, and the county coroner's professional, careful voice, and every word arriving as if through water, distorted and wrong and impossible. He had not been anywhere near that room. That sentence lived in him permanently underneath everything else. It was the sentence he would carry for whatever years he had left, not as punishment exactly, but as weight. The kind of weight that changes the way you move through the world if you let it. He had decided to let it. He stood at the bar with his water and listened to the guitar from the jukebox and did not think about any of this, which was the same as thinking about all of it, which was the same as always. The door opened at 20 minutes past 9. The cold came in first November in eastern Kentucky, carrying the particular density of mountain air in late fall, heavy and sharp, kind that finds the gaps in your collar. And then the child walked in. She was small, not small in the way of very young children, because she was 10 years old, which is not so young, but she carried herself in the way of children who have learned early that the world is larger than them and does not reliably arrange itself in their favor. Her jacket was thin, a pale blue windbreaker built for September pulled over what looked like two shirts underneath the collar of one visible above the other. Her dark hair was braided, the braid coming loose at the bottom, held with a frayed pink ribbon that had been tied and retied until the fabric had begun to give way at the edges. Her sneakers were pink with white laces that had been cleaned recently, cleaned carefully. She had done that herself. You could always tell when a child was tending their own things because no adult was going to tend them. There was a precision to it, a deliberateness that came from understanding that the job would not get done otherwise. She was holding a bicycle, a blue mountain bike youth-sized with a pink helmet dangling from the handlebar by its strap. The helmet swayed gently as she stopped just inside the door, and then it was still, and the girl was still, and the rusted nail was very, very still. The pool ball stopped. Grady Briggs had been mid-stroke, and he simply did not complete it. The cue dropped a fraction in his hands, and the cue ball sat unmoved on the green felt. Wes Decker set his glass down precisely and did not pick it back up. The guitar from the jukebox kept playing because the jukebox did not understand what had just happened, but no one was listening to it anymore. Clint Pruitt, who had not moved in 20 minutes, went more still, which should not have been geometrically possible. Aldrich Reese's coin stopped turning. At the end of the bar, Marcus Webb turned his head toward the door. The girl stood in the entrance to the Rusted Nail at 20 past 9 on a Friday night in November, and she looked at the room full of men in leather, and she did not look afraid of them. That was the thing that settled into the room slowly like a stone finding the bottom of deep water. She was not afraid of the iron wolves. There was apprehension in her face, yes, but it was directed outward toward whatever she had come from, not toward the room she had walked into. The apprehension of a child who is afraid of what she has left behind, not what she is walking toward. Her eyes moved across the room with a steadiness that was almost startling. Dark eyes, serious eyes, eyes that had spent a long time watching the world and drawing conclusions from what they found. She gripped the handlebars of the blue bicycle until the whites of her knuckles showed against the chrome. And then she said it. Her voice was small, but it carried without wavering. "Will you buy my bicycle?" No one spoke for a moment that stretched longer than a moment should. The jukebox guitar filled the silence, and nobody heard it. Grady Briggs set the pool cue down without a sound. He was the sergeant at arms, and that meant that situations requiring a response were in the first instance his to handle. He moved away from the pool table with a deliberateness that was calibrated the way you approach something frightened, when you understand that your size is part of the equation and you have to account for it. A large man moving carefully, taking up no more space than necessary. He crossed the room and crouched down so that he was closer to her height. 6'2", bending itself into 5' nothing in one slow, careful movement. His hands were clasped in front of him, knuckles down. His voice, when he spoke, came out softer than anyone in the room would have predicted. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. "My name is Lily," she said. "I need to sell my bike." Grady nodded slowly. Okay, Lily, can you tell me why? She swallowed. The pink ribbon on her braid trembled with the movement. My mom is sick. She needs medicine. It costs $55 and I don't have it, and I don't have anyone else to ask. The room remained very quiet. At the end of the bar, Marcus Webb set down his glass of water and pushed off from the bar rail. He walked toward the door with the unhurried movement of a man who has learned that authority doesn't require speed. He stopped a few feet back from where Grady was crouched, far enough to give the girl room, close enough to be present in the way that mattered. He looked at the bicycle. The blue paint was scuffed in places. The tires were slightly low from sitting. The pink helmet on the handlebar had a ding on the left side old enough that the paint crack had darkened with time. This bicycle had been ridden hard and loved hard and left outside in weather that bicycles shouldn't be left in. Someone had tried to clean it up before bringing it here. The chrome was wiped. The handlebars had been straightened. He looked at the girl. What's your name? He asked, though he had already heard it. Lily Harper. How old are you, Lily? 10. Where do you live? She gave him the address without hesitation. 19 Sycamore Loop. She said it the way someone says something they have rehearsed, not nervously but prepared. She had thought this through before walking in here. Marcus looked at Grady briefly. Grady's expression said nothing that needed words. Your mom, Marcus said, bringing his eyes back to her. What kind of sick is she? Lily's jaw tightened, not from anger, from control, the careful muscle management of a child who has learned that her face is something to manage carefully. She can't get up. She's been on the couch since yesterday morning. She needs medicine from the pharmacy. Did she send you? Lily shook her head. She's asleep. She doesn't know I left. At the far table, Aldrich Reese folded his hands on the tabletop and watched the girl with the focused attention he gave to things that contained more information than was visible on the surface. Wes Decker had turned fully on his bar stool to face the room, his drink forgotten. Clint Pruitt stood up from his bar stool, crossed his arms, and leaned back against the bar. His eyes were on the girl, and his jaw was set in a way that had nothing to do with calculation. Marcus lowered himself to a crouch the way Grady had. It cost him. His knees were old. His joints had accumulated the weather of too many decades on a motorcycle in all seasons. But he went down without complaint and made himself level with those dark, steady eyes. Lily, he said, before we talk about your bike, can I ask you something? She looked at him without looking away. Your mama, how'd she end up not being able to get up? A pause. Not long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. But those seconds carried a weight that every man in the room could feel in his chest. She fell, Lily said. Fell. Down the stairs. Marcus nodded very slowly. He kept his eyes on her face and did not soften his expression. He just looked at her and let the silence hold. Lily, does your mama fall when someone else is home? The 3 seconds became 5, became 8. Lily looked down at her pink sneakers. She moved the toe of her right foot against the wooden floor of the bar, a small back and forth motion. Then she stopped. She raised her eyes back to his, and she told him. She told him about Wade Donovan, the way children tell terrible truths in pieces, each one costing her something, each one released with the careful deliberateness of someone who has carried these words for a long time and is choosing which ones to set down first. Wade was her mother's boyfriend. He had been living with them for a while now. He got angry. He yelled. He broke things. He said her mother was stupid, said she couldn't do anything right, said she ought to be grateful for what she had. He pushed her. Sometimes he did more than push her. Her mother tried to stay calm. Her mother tried to keep things smooth. Her mother was good at that, or had been before Wade made it so that no amount of smoothness ever stopped anything. He said if Lily told anyone, they would take her away and put her in a home. He said her mother would be alone. He said a lot of things. But the most important thing he had done, more important than the yelling, more important than what happened after the yelling, was that he had made her mother afraid to leave. He had made her mother believe that leaving would cost more than staying. And her mother was a smart woman. Her mother was careful and kind, and she had been a good mother even inside this bad situation. But fear is not a failure of intelligence. Fear is a response to a real thing. And Wade Donovan had made the fear real in ways that were very hard to argue with. Lily said all of this with the precision of a child who had been observing the situation for a long time and had thought carefully about what she was seeing. She was 10 years old and she had already constructed a complete picture of the psychology of control in her household. That was the most devastating thing about what she said. Not the facts themselves, though. The facts were devastating enough. It was the clarity, the understanding, the way a 10-year-old child had been forced to develop the analytical vocabulary of someone twice her age because her circumstances had required it of her. Lily Harper had grown up very fast, and the growing had not been gentle. At the pool table, Grady Briggs stood up from his crouch slowly. His face went through several things in quick succession and settled on something that was very controlled and very quiet. He looked at the floor, then the ceiling, then the door at the back of the room. He said nothing. Wes Decker had gone still on his bar stool in the focused, gathered way of something that has identified its direction and is deciding when to move. At the far table, Aldrich Reese had produced a small notebook and written down the address Lily had given, 19 Sycamore Loop. He looked at it for a moment. Then he closed the notebook. Clint Pruitt pushed off the bar in one quick motion and walked toward the back of the room and stopped there with his back to everyone, both hands pressed flat against the wood paneling. He stood like that for a count of several breaths, his shoulders moving with one long, controlled exhale. Then he came back. In the part of him that was always partially somewhere else, Clint Pruitt was on a street not far from here. He was 8 years old and it was late, and the walls in the house where he lived were thin, in the way that cheap construction makes walls thin, and through those walls came sounds that a child should not have to catalog and cannot help cataloging. He had grown up 3 doors from the address she had just given, not in that specific house, in a different one, same street, same sound, same long education in the topography of other people's suffering heard through plaster and wood. He had left Harlan at 18, telling himself he was leaving all of it behind. The truth was that you didn't leave those sounds. You carried them until something changed them into something else. He came back and stood where he had stood before and crossed his arms and looked at the girl and kept his face arranged. Marcus was still at eye level with Lily. He had not moved from his crouch. "How long have you known about us?" he asked. Lily met his eyes without hesitation. 4 months. Something shifted in the room. A small shift, the way a single instrument can change the character of a whole piece of music without announcing itself. "You knew about the Iron Wolves," he said, not a question. He was reading something in her face. "I used to take the long way home from school," she said, "past Millbrook Road." The long way from the elementary school to Sycamore Loop was exactly twice the distance of the short way and made no geographical sense unless you were specifically trying to pass a certain point. "I saw you last summer. There was a woman on Mrs. Patterson's porch. She was crying. Her husband had been drinking and she was scared. 2 of your men walked over." She glanced at Grady and then at Aldrich. They didn't raise their voices at him. They just talked. And then he went inside and didn't come back out. And Mrs. Patterson stopped crying. She looked at Marcus without wavering. "I watched the whole thing." The room held its breath. "After that," Lily said, "I started thinking about what to do, about my mom." She took a breath that was steadier than it had any right to be. "I decided that if it ever got really bad, if she needed help, and I couldn't get it anywhere else, I would come here." She had been 10 years old. She had watched a scene through a chain-link fence on a late summer evening. She had processed what she observed with the same careful attention she applied to everything. She had formed a contingency plan and stored it in the organized mental drawer where she kept things that needed to be kept until they were needed. She had carried that plan through 4 months of November approaching and the bad nights getting closer together and the medicine running low. And tonight, when Claire had not woken properly and the pharmacy needed payment and the clock was moving toward closing time, She had retrieved the plan from wherever she had stored it and executed it without hesitation. She had walked 40 minutes through November cold with a bicycle and a plan. Marcus Webb looked at this child for a long, quiet moment. 12 years had not changed the weight of what he carried when he thought about Lori. Grief doesn't diminish with time. What happens if you're lucky and deliberate about it is that you get better at distributing the weight across your life so that it doesn't crush any single moment. But the weight is always the same weight. Lori had been 26, and she had a man in her life who hurt her, and Marcus had not looked closely enough at what he was seeing. He had gone to identify his daughter's body on a Tuesday afternoon in April, and the coroner had been professional, and every word had arrived in his ears as if through water, slow and wrong and impossible. He had not been anywhere near that room. That sentence lived in him underneath everything else, not as punishment, but as a kind of orientation, a compass point. He looked at Lily Harper and felt something that was not quite what he would call emotion. Or if it was emotion, it was emotion that had been compressed under 12 years of weight into something harder and denser than its original form. He felt it move through him, and he let it move, and then he was simply a man looking at a 10-year-old girl who had walked 40 minutes in the cold because she had watched his brothers through a chain-link fence and decided that they were the kind of men she could trust with the most important things she had. He looked at the bicycle, at the scuffed blue paint wiped clean, at the pink helmet dinged and carefully tended. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket. "I'll buy your bike," he said. Lily opened her mouth. $55 is... "I know what $55 is," he said. He pulled out his wallet. He counted out $200 in 20s and held it out to her. She looked at the money, then at him. "I only needed 55. "You asked for help," he said. "We don't measure that." She looked at the bills for a moment with the expression of a child trying very hard to maintain composure in the face of something that is threatening to undo it. She took the money folded, put it in the pocket of her thin jacket, and zipped the pocket closed the way you secure something you are not willing to lose. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said. He stood from his crouch, both knees registering their objections, and turned toward the room. He didn't need to raise his voice. He looked at his brothers, at Grady and Wes and Clint and Aldrich and the other 6 men in the room who had been listening since the door opened, and he said one word, "Brothers." That was enough. Leather shifted. Men set down glasses and pool cues and playing cards. Wes Decker was already off his bar stool. Clint Pruitt was already moving toward the back where the jackets were kept. Aldrich Reese closed his notebook, stood, and moved toward the door with the quiet efficiency of a man who has already made every decision he needs to make. Grady Briggs moved to stand beside Marcus. 19 Sycamore Loop, Aldrich said from the doorway to no one in particular and everyone in general. "I know the layout." He said nothing else. He didn't need to. Lily had turned toward the door at the sounds of movement, and her eyes had gone slightly wide, not from fear of the men, but from the sound building outside, the sound of engines catching in sequence, one after another, the low rolling thunder of 8 Harley engines turning over in a cold parking lot building from a single growl into something that vibrated in the sternum. She took a small step back. Marcus moved to her side. He put his hand gently on her shoulder, not gripping, just present, the way you indicate solidarity without demanding anything from it. "That sound," he said, "you don't have to be afraid of it." She looked up at him. "Those engines are on your side tonight." She held his eyes for a moment. Then she looked out through the cracked and taped window toward the parking lot where the running lights of 8 motorcycles glowed amber and red in the dark, lined up and waiting like something that had been built for exactly this purpose. Lily Harper was 10 years old, and she had spent 4 months carrying a plan. The way you carry something fragile, carefully, always aware of it, always checking that it was still intact. She had spent 4 months watching her mother try to keep things smooth with a one who had no interest in smooth. She had walked 40 minutes in November, cold, with the bicycle and a plan and $2.37 in the frayed pink ribbon in her braid, in the knowledge that the pharmacy closed at 10 o'clock. Now she stood in the doorway of the rusted nail and looked at 8 sets of running lights. She let out a breath that she seemed to have been holding for a very long time, and then she smiled. It was small, it was careful. It was the smile of a child who has not had many reasons to use that expression and therefore does not spend it lightly. But it was real. It reached those dark watching eyes and changed them briefly into something that was simply a 10-year-old girl's eyes, just for that moment, just that. Grady Briggs picked up the blue bicycle with one hand and carried it to the door. Wes Decker took the pink helmet from the handlebar. Aldrich Reese had already stepped outside and was speaking to the others in the low, efficient manner he used when things needed to move. Clint Pruitt paused at the door beside Lily. He looked down at her for a moment with those calculating eyes, and there was something in them that was different from their usual quality. Softer, as if something that had been held at a controlled distance had briefly been allowed closer. He said nothing. He nodded once, the small, tight nod of a man acknowledging something that matters, and went out to his bike. Marcus stayed beside him. "You ready?" he said. She looked up at him. The ribbon in her braid caught the bar light behind them, pink and frayed and retied too many times. She had cleaned her sneakers. She had wiped the chrome. She had walked 40 minutes in November cold with a plan. "Yes," she said. And the Iron Wolves of Harlan County, Kentucky rode out into the dark, 8 engines, loud and certain, as anything that had ever been certain in that county, with a 10-year-old girl walking her borrowed path beside them toward whatever waited at 19 Sycamore Loop. The neon sign above the bar glowed orange-red into the November dark, missing its N, unrepaired and unapologetic. The running lights moved away down Cutter's Road in a line and turned onto the main street and did not slow. Lily walked between Grady Briggs and the blue bicycle he carried, and she did not look back. She had waited 4 months for this night. She was ready. The road from the Rusted Nail to 19 Sycamore Loop was 2 miles in a straight line, and a different world in every way that mattered. Wes Decker walked beside Lily on the shoulder of the road. He had offered quietly without ceremony, simply parked his motorcycle in with the others, and walked. The 7 remaining bikes moved at a pace nobody had to discuss, slow enough to stay alongside a 10-year-old girl, settled enough in their sound that she wasn't overwhelmed by it. The engines dropped to an idle rumble, a rolling presence rather than a roar, and the formation moved through the dark of Cutter's Road and out onto the main residential street of Harlan's east side, like something deliberate and unhurried and impossible to argue with. Cars coming the other direction slowed without being flagged. Drivers saw the running lights and the leather and the girl walking in the middle of it all, and they understood in whatever instinctive way people understand certain things without being able to articulate them that they should give the road. Lily walked with her chin slightly up and her arms at her sides. The $200 zipped into her jacket pocket, her sneakers finding the pavement in a rhythm that was steady, even if her breathing wasn't entirely. She was working to keep her composure. Every few steps she would glance at the running lights moving beside her, and you could see it registering the strangeness in the scale of what was happening, pressing against whatever she was maintaining. Wes Decker did not try to talk to her. He walked. That was all. But he walked close enough that the warmth of another person was there if she needed it. And he kept his eyes on the road ahead with the patience of a man who understood that sometimes presence was the whole thing and presence was enough. Grady Briggs rode at the edge of the formation closest to her, holding the handlebars of the blue bicycle as he rode with one hand and steering his own machine with the other. It should not have worked physically, and it did not work gracefully, but it worked steadily, and the bicycle moved through the Harlan County dark the way it had moved through everything else in its life, imperfectly and without stopping. Aldrich Reese was at the rear of the formation. He had said very little since they left the bar. He had the address in his notebook and the notebook in his jacket and his eyes on the road ahead. He had also, in the 20 minutes since Lily had walked into the Rusted Nail, been turning the problem of 19 Sycamore Loop over in his mind, the way he turned coins between his fingers methodically until every surface had been examined. He was thinking about the layout he had mentioned. He was thinking about angles and positions and the particular geometry of situations that might go in more than one direction. Marcus Webb led the formation and said nothing and thought everything. They turned onto Millbrook and then through the older residential blocks where the houses sat close together on narrow lots and the trees were large and leafless now. In November, the bare branches making intricate patterns against the gray sky. The street lights were inconsistent. Some blocks had them working, some had been out long enough that nobody expected them back. The neighborhood was not dangerous in any way that required announcing. It was simply worn. The kind of worn that settles into a place over decades of being passed over, of resources going elsewhere, of people making do because making do was what they knew. Sycamore Loop was a short street, a half loop that curved off the main residential road and bent back to rejoin it 12 houses later. The trees here were old enough that in summer the canopy would close overhead and make a green tunnel of shade. In November, they were stripped to their bones and the sky showed through in fragments between the branches pale gray and starless. Number 19 was a duplex, 2 units sharing a front porch and a steep set of exterior stairs that ran up the right side to the upper unit. The building had settled slightly to one side over the years, not dangerously, but enough that you noticed it when you looked straight on the kind of list that a structure develops when years of weight press down on a foundation that was never quite right. The paint was a pale gray that had weathered down to something resembling old ash. A front window had plastic sheeting over it on the outside, sealed with tape that was starting to pull at the edges. The plastic moved in the slight wind with a sound like something restless. From the porch ceiling hung a wind chime made of old spoons, 8 or 9 of them, the handles bent into hooks, the bowls clicking softly against one another in the cold air. Not musical exactly, more like something that had once known how to make music and had forgotten the tune. The porch light was off. The lower unit, their unit, Lily had said, had a light somewhere in the back of the house, dim and yellowish, visible only through the gap under the door. Marcus raised his right hand and the engines behind him cut off in sequence. The silence that followed was the deep-shaped silence that comes after sustained noise fuller than ordinary quiet with an absence that had dimension. 8 men sat on stopped motorcycles without speaking. Then Marcus swung off his bike. Grady set the blue bicycle against the porch railing and was at the door in 2 steps. He looked back at Lily once. She had come up the porch steps without being told to Westdecker 1 step behind her. Her eyes were fixed on the door. "Stay just behind me," Grady said in the same voice he had used in the bar. She nodded. He tried the door. Unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped through and stopped. Claire Harper was not on the couch. She was on the floor, 3 feet inside the doorway on her hands, and one knee with the other leg extended behind her in the process of getting herself upright. She had heard the engines outside. She had heard them go quiet. She was trying to get to the door. She looked up when Grady stepped in and made a sound that was not quite a word. Her face was something that took a moment to look at directly. The left side was swollen and deeply discolored, bruising that had been developing for at least 36 hours, layered and dark. There was dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Her right eye was reduced to a narrow slit by swelling. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt that had come partly off one shoulder, and she was guarding her right side with every movement in the way that means ribs, that involuntary, careful self-protection of the trunk that you cannot help when the bones underneath it have been damaged. She had heard the engines from wherever she had been lying. She had started moving the moment Lily left. It lodged in the chest to see it this woman with broken ribs who had hauled herself 3 feet across a wooden floor because her daughter had gone for help, and she was not going to be found lying down. She had not known who was coming. She had not known if it was help or something worse. She had gotten up anyway. That choice made in pain and uncertainty was the first clear choice she had made in 2 years and 3 months. Grady crouched in front of her immediately. "Ma'am, don't move. We're going to help you." Claire looked past him to the door and her face changed when she found Lily. "Lily." Her voice was rough, damaged from whatever she'd been through before lying down. "Lily, baby." Lily was through the door and beside her mother before anyone could speak, kneeling on the floor, putting her hands on her mother's face with a carefulness that was hard to watch the precision of a child who has learned that exactly where not to touch, which surfaces are damaged, how to hold someone without making the pain worse. I'm okay, Lily said. Mom, I'm okay. They're helping us. Who are they? It's okay. Lily's voice was steady in a way that had nothing to do with her age. They came when I asked them to. They're here. Claire looked at the men filling the doorway of her home. Leather jackets, heavy boots, large men in a small space. Her face moved through fear and confusion, and underneath both of those, something that had been under pressure for a long time and was recognizing an exit. He'll come back, she said. If he comes back and finds, then we'll be here when he does, Grady said. Quiet, unhurried. The statement of a man who does not need volume to be believed. Claire closed her eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, her shoulders came down from where they had been held for what was clearly a very long time. Marcus came in behind Grady, and the other men came in behind Marcus, moving carefully in the small space, taking positions without instruction. Wes stayed near the front window. Clint checked the back of the house, the kitchen, the rear door, and came back shaking his head clear. Aldrich stood near the entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes moving slowly through the room. The room itself told a story that Claire had not been able to tell in words. A chair near the kitchen had one leg splintered at the joint, the leg lying separate from the rest of it on the floor. A lamp had been knocked over and replaced, but not quite straightened. The wall beside the hallway had a dent in the drywall the size of a fist, the paint cracked outward from the center in a sunburst pattern that someone had tried to smooth over and not quite managed. On the kitchen counter, held to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sun, was a child's drawing, house, a woman, a small girl, three figures in careful crayon, and above them a sun with rays drawn by pressing the yellow crayon very hard into the paper, each ray deliberate, each one taking effort. Every man in that room saw that drawing. They moved Claire carefully to the couch. Grady did most of it, his large hands placed with a gentleness that was the opposite of their usual work, supporting her right side, taking her weight slowly. She made no sound, but her jaw tightened at certain moments with the involuntary response to pain that cannot be controlled. When she was settled, Lily sat on the edge of the cushion beside her and did not move from that position. Marcus pulled a chair from the kitchen table, turned it backward, and sat with his forearms resting on the back of it. He was at Claire's eye level. He gave her time, let the room settle, and let her get used to the presence of strangers in her space before asking anything of her. Claire, he said, I'm Marcus. You can call me Duke. We're not here to cause you trouble. We're here because your daughter decided to trust us. A pause. You raised a remarkable kid. Claire looked at Lily. Something moved across her face, pride and love, and grief arriving together and sharing the same expression. Can you tell me how long this has been going on? Marcus said. She told him. Not all at once. Truth that has been kept for a long time comes out the way water comes through a crack, carefully at first, then less carefully, the volume building as the weight of containment becomes greater than the weight of release. She had been with Wade Donovan for 2 years and 3 months. He had been attentive at first, helpful, the kind of helpful that registers as genuinely useful when you have been managing alone for a long time and have forgotten what it felt like not to. She had been alone with Lily for almost a year before Wade, in that year, had left her with a specific kind of exhaustion that made consideration feel like love. And then things had changed, gradually enough that she had found herself well inside something before she could name what it was. The yelling came first, then the accounting for her time, her movements, her words, the way she dressed, the way she was raising Lily. The accounting became corrections. The corrections became the certainty of consequences. By the time it became physical, she had already been taught not to respond the way a person should respond to these things. She had been taught to manage, to absorb, to keep the surface smooth. She said all of this looking at her hands in her lap with the controlled delivery of someone who has recounted a sequence of events so many times in their own mind that it has become a kind of practiced narration. Except it was not flat underneath the delivery. Underneath it, something shook like a structure with a fault line that has been still for a long time and is only now beginning to move. 6 months ago, she had packed 2 bags while Wade was at work, one for herself, one for Lily. She had memorized the bus schedule, had her sister's address in Lexington on a piece of paper in her pocket, had Lily ready before school with a story about a trip to Aunt Ruth's. She had gotten them to the bus station. She had their tickets in her hand. Her phone had rung. Wade's voice, quiet, conversational. He told her he hoped she was comfortable at the bus station. He said he had been watching the school for a few weeks just in case. He said the people he knew through work were spread across Lexington and every road between here and there, and that Lily was the kind of kid people noticed and remembered. He said he wasn't angry. He said he was giving her the opportunity to make a good decision. She had looked at Lily's face. She had gone back. She had told Lily the trip was postponed. Lily had not asked why. She had simply taken her bag back inside and put it under her bed and said nothing about it. Children who have learned to manage a difficult situation do not make the management harder by asking questions they understand will not be answered honestly. I kept thinking, Claire said, if I stayed calm enough, if I could just keep things level, he wouldn't. She stopped. You don't have to explain that to me, Marcus said. I should have. No. His voice was steady, definite without being hard. You were protecting her. Every day you stayed in that house, you were keeping yourself between your daughter and that man. That was protection. That counted. Claire looked at Lily. Lily looked back at her. It was a look that contained a year's worth of things neither of them had said to the other. A year of careful management and deliberate quiet in the maintenance of a household around a source of damage, two people navigating the same territory separately, and each assuming the other did not fully know how bad it was. They both knew. They had both known the whole time. From near the entrance, Aldrich Reese said, Marcus, even, controlled. The voice he used when something required attention without requiring urgency. Yet, Marcus turned. Aldrich had brought the blue bicycle inside from the porch, reasonable given the cold, and set it near the door. But he was not looking at the bike in the way of a man who had placed it somewhere and moved on. He was looking at the underside of the top tube, the horizontal bar of the frame, where it met the head tube, angling the small LED flashlight from his jacket at something on the metal. Marcus crossed the room and looked where Aldrich was looking. A patch of the blue paint had worn back to bare metal from years of the helmet strap being buckled over the same spot. Just beside that worn patch, scratched into the metal itself, was something fine, a knife blade, an engraving tool. Something held with patience were letters. For Lily, ride toward the light. Always. C.W. Small, precise, put there deliberately by someone who had taken their time and pressed carefully and wanted each letter to form correctly. You did not do that in 10 minutes. You did that on an evening when you had something to say and no other way to make sure it lasted. Marcus read it twice. Then he looked at Lily. She had been watching him. When she saw where the light was pointing, something in her expression changed. Some careful, maintained things shifted. Who's C.W.? Marcus asked. Lily was quiet for a moment. The quiet of deciding, not of not knowing. Corbett, she said. Corbett Wynne. She said the name like something retrieved from a private place, brought out carefully and set down. On the couch, Claire went completely still. He's your dad, Marcus said. Yeah. Lily looked at the inscription. He gave me the bike before he left. He put that on there himself. He showed me where it was. She paused. He told me to look for it whenever I forgot that someone was thinking of me. The wind chime outside touched itself in the cold, a small, uncertain sound. Your mom said he left, Marcus said, carefully, not an accusation, a navigation. Lily looked at her mother. The look lasted several seconds. It was not angry. It was not hurt exactly. It was considered the look of a child who has held a question for a long time and is deciding whether this is the moment. She said he left because he didn't want us anymore, Lily said quietly. On the couch, Claire pressed one hand over her mouth. But people who don't want you anymore, Lily said, don't spend an evening putting words on your bike with a knife so you'll have something to find later. She looked at the inscription again. He called it a message in a bottle. He said someday I'd find it. Her jaw was steady. Her voice was steady. I found it on the 4th birthday after he left. I've read it a lot. Nobody in the room said anything. Claire's hand was still pressed over her mouth. Her eyes were full. She was not going to address this tonight. There was too much happening, and she was in too much pain. And the full truth of it, what she had told Lily, what she had believed, what Wade had made her believe, was going to require more than this moment to tell. But she was looking at her daughter with the expression of a woman who has been found out in something she believed was kindness and is discovering it was something else. Marcus did not press it. He filed it and left it for when there was time. It was Clint Pruitt who moved first. He had been against the far wall, arms crossed, and he moved toward the front window quickly enough that heads turned. Headlights, slow-moving headlights coming down Sycamore Loop at a speed that meant someone was reading address numbers in the dark. Lily heard the engine before the lights reached the window. She made a small sound, not a cry, just the involuntary signal of a body recognizing something the mind is already afraid of. She pulled her feet up onto the couch and pressed herself against her mother's uninjured left side, and Claire's arm came around her without hesitation. Marcus was already moving. He positioned himself between the couch and the front of the room. He did not need to say anything. Wes moved to the window to the side of it, looking out without putting himself in the line of sight from the drive. Grady went to the front door. Aldrich moved to the left side of the room. Clint took the right. The truck pulled into the gravel drive alongside the house. The engine held at idle for a moment. Then it cut. A door opened and closed. Footsteps on gravel. Lily's breathing had changed. It had become shallow and controlled in the way of someone who has learned that the most important thing when that sound is coming is to be very still. Marcus turned his head just enough to see her. She was watching the front door with the focused, gathered attention of someone who has learned that stillness is safety. He moved 2 steps back toward the couch and put himself directly in front of her, back to her face to the door. Claire pressed her lips to the top of Lily's head and did not lift them. Her eyes were on the door. Please, she said, very quietly. Just that one word addressed to the room, to Marcus, to whatever was going to happen next. Please don't let him near her. He won't touch her, Marcus said. He did not turn around. I promise you that. The footsteps came up the porch steps. 3 hard knocks, then 4 more. Claire! Wade Donovan's voice through the door, not loud, controlled. The deliberate control of a man who has learned to use quiet the way other men use volume, not to soothe but to unsettle. Open the door. A pause. I know there are bikes out front. I know you've got company. Still quiet, calibrated reasonableness. Open the door, Claire, and let's talk about this like adults. Grady Briggs opened the door. Wade Donovan was a man in his late 30s with a medium build and a face that had been arranged into an expression of careful assessment. He was wearing a work jacket and carrying a manila envelope. He looked at Grady, who filled the doorway in a way that did not leave room for argument, and then he looked past Grady at the room beyond, and his expression moved through several rapid recalibrations before settling back into the assessment. He was not the largest man in the room. He was not close to the most dangerous looking. He knew both of those things. He had expected something. He had seen the bikes, and he was taking inventory now. Reading the room, counting, and then he did something that Marcus had not quite anticipated. He smiled, not largely, just a slight adjustment at the corners of his mouth, the smile of a man who believes he still has a card worth playing. He stepped forward until Grady's presence required him to stop. He looked past Grady at Marcus and had identified with the practiced speed of a man who has spent years finding the decision-maker in any room that Marcus was the person he needed to address. I don't know who you are, Wade said pleasantly, or why you're in my home. You don't live here. Lily's voice, completely flat, no anger, no fear, a statement of fact delivered from behind Marcus's shoulder from the couch, where she had stood up and was now standing straight. Something moved through Wade's face. Fast. He controlled it. He held up the manila envelope at chest height in both hands, the way you display something when you want people to see it before you explain what it is. Temporary guardianship order, he said, filed 3 weeks ago, signed by Judge Harmon. He looked at Lily briefly, then at Marcus. I've been concerned for some time about the welfare of this child given her mother's instability. The judge agreed. He let that settle for a moment. You lay a hand on me, I walk out of here with that kid, and everything you've done tonight becomes something very different. The room was absolutely silent. Lily looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the envelope. He looked at it for 5 full seconds, long enough to think through what it would mean if it was real and what it would mean if it wasn't, and what the difference between those two things looked like in a room like this. And then the floorboard on the porch behind Wade took Wade under a boot, and Wade's shoulders changed a slight tightening, and he turned. Sheriff Roy Callahan stood on the porch. He was in his mid-50s, lean with the kind of face that gave nothing away without being asked for it. He was in his uniform jacket, the badge on the chest catching the porch light at the edge. He had a deputy somewhere behind him, but the deputy was giving him room. He looked at Wade Donovan for a moment with the expression of a man who has been managing a situation carefully for a long time, waiting for the conditions to shift. Wade Donovan, he said. He said it the way you say the name of a problem you have been watching for 2 years, waiting for the moment it finally gave you something to work with. Sheriff, Wade's voice recalibrated again. I'm glad you're here, actually. These men. Nobody broke into anything, Callahan said. He stepped through the door around Wade, who had no good way to prevent it. He looked at Claire on the couch, at her face, at Lily. He looked at Marcus Webb, and something passed between them that did not require explanation. Then he looked back at Wade. I've been keeping a file on you for 22 months, Callahan said. His voice was even, unhurried. Restraining order violations from a prior relationship in Breathitt County. 2 reported incidents from this address that Claire chose not to pursue. He paused. Tonight, Claire's going to have the opportunity to make a different choice. He looked at Claire. Ma'am, would you like to give a statement? Claire Harper looked at Wade. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, 4-5. And during those seconds, something happened in her face that was quiet and permanent. The management stopped. Whatever she had been maintaining, the smooth surface, the careful equilibrium, she set it down. Like something heavy she had been carrying since the day she walked back from the bus station and had finally decided to put down and leave. Yes, she said, I would. Wade took a step forward. Grady Briggs was in front of him before the step completed. One very large hand placed flat on Wade's chest. Not pushing, just present, immovable. Wade looked down at the hand, then up at Grady's face. Wade went still. Clint moved to the door and stood in front of it. Wes moved to the right side of the room. Aldrich was already behind Wade without anyone having watched him move there. The deputy came through, and he and Callahan handled the rest of it efficiently and without drama. The cuffs went on before Wade had finished calculating his remaining options. The manila envelope was taken as evidence. Callahan had noted, without being told, that Judge Harmon had retired from the bench 8 months ago after a review of procedural conduct in the retirement had been described by the Kentucky Court of Justice as voluntary, in terms that left the voluntary nature somewhat ambiguous. There were investigators who found that thread interesting. The signed order in the envelope was going to face significant scrutiny. Mr. Donovan, Callahan said, steering him toward the door, I hope you've been comfortable in Harlan County, because that chapter is concluding tonight. Wade said nothing. He was walked out past the wind chime of Old Spoons and down the porch steps and into the back of Roy Callahan's cruiser. The door shut. The lights came on. The cruiser backed down the driveway and was gone. The room took a breath. Lily had not moved from the couch. She was still standing, still straight, still watching the door. After the sound of the cruiser faded, she stood there for several more seconds, as if making certain. Then she sat down beside her mother. And Claire gathered her carefully the way you gather someone when your ribs are broken and the pain is real and none of that matters at all compared to the thing you are holding. And she held her daughter with the arm that could hold. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The hospital was 20 minutes away by motorcycle, which was to say they were there in 15. An ambulance would have been faster to summon, but Claire had looked at Marcus and asked quietly if they could stay together, and nobody disputed it. Grady drove Claire in a truck belonging to one of the other members who had followed from the bar. Wes rode ahead to clear the route. The rest formed up around the truck the same way they had formed up around Lily on the road to Sycamore Loop, running lights in the dark holding formation. The emergency room at Harlan County ARH was a small facility that knew how to handle a Friday night. The staff took one look at Claire and moved with the efficiency of people who recognized the presentation, the guarded movement, the controlled face, the vocabulary of injuries that had accumulated over time rather than in a single event. They were professional and they were kind, and they asked Claire the questions they needed to ask in a private space, and Claire answered them. Lily would not release her mother's hand. She held it through the intake assessment, through the wait, through the doorway of the examination bay, until a nurse, a woman in her 40s with a face that had learned not to judge and knew exactly how, knelt down and spoke to Lily directly and told her that her mom needed some pictures taken and that Lily could sit just outside the curtain and hear everything and that she'd have her mom's hand back in 10 minutes. Lily let go. She sat in the plastic chair outside the curtain. She sat straight, feet flat on the floor, hands folded in her lap, the pink ribbon in her braid fraying a little further at the edge. Clint Pruitt sat down beside her. He sat in the plastic hospital chair, in his leather jacket and his boots, and said nothing. He looked at the opposite wall. After a minute, he got up and came back with a paper cup of hot chocolate from the vending machine down the hall, the kind that is a pale approximation of the real thing, but is hot and sweet and constitutes at 11 o'clock on a Friday night in a hospital a genuine act of care. He set it on Lily's knee. She looked at it, then at him. He was already looking at the opposite wall. She picked up the cup and drank. Aldrich Reese came back from the hospital gift shop, a small cart near the main entrance that stayed open on weekends, carrying a small white plush toy shaped approximately like an angel, the kind with a halo that sits slightly tilted. The stitching was imperfect. The halo was gold pipe cleaner. He offered it to Lily without comment or ceremony. Lily took it. She held it in the hand that wasn't holding the hot chocolate cup. She looked at it for a long moment. "Thank you," she said. Aldrich sat down on her other side. He too looked at the wall. The x-rays took 40 minutes and told the story Claire's body had been keeping. 3 broken ribs on the right side, 2 with displacement. Contusion of the right kidney. A healed fracture in the left forearm that had set improperly, meaning it had not been treated at the time of injury. An older fracture along the orbital ridge of the right eye also healed without treatment. The physician spoke to Claire with the measured care of someone conveying information that goes beyond medicine, and Claire listened and nodded where nodding was required. When the physician finished, Claire looked at the ceiling of the examination bay for a long time. Then she pressed the back of her hand over her eyes. And then she cried, not loudly, not the way crying appears in performances of grief, but steadily and quietly the way people cry when they have been holding something under pressure for a very long time, and the holding has finally become the harder thing. Marcus Webb was in the chair beside her bed. He had been there since they let him in. "I kept thinking," Claire said when she could speak, "if I just stayed calm enough, if I just kept things level, he wouldn't." She stopped. "I thought I was protecting Lily. I thought if I stayed, at least I could be between them." "You were protecting her," Marcus said. "I wasn't. You were." His voice was steady, certain without being loud. "Every day you kept yourself between your daughter and that man was protection. That counted. All of it counted." He paused. "And now you're protecting her from outside that house, and that counts more." Claire looked at him. At this man she did not know who had come in leather on a motorcycle and who was sitting in a plastic chair in a hospital at midnight because her 10-year-old daughter had walked 40 minutes in the cold with a plan. She chose you, Claire said. Yeah. Something moved through Marcus's face. Briefly. She did. He looked toward the curtain where through the gap they could see Lily's small sneakers on the floor of the chair outside. Smart kid. Outside the hospital, 8 motorcycles sat in the visitor parking lot. Engines off. Kickstands down. Their riders distributed around the lot in the configurations of men who have adapted to waiting in the cold. Some sat on their bikes. Some leaned against the wall near the entrance with cups of terrible coffee from a machine near the sliding doors. They were not going anywhere. Nobody had said anything about going anywhere. It had not needed to be said. They were there because a 10-year-old girl had walked into their bar with a bicycle and a plan, and the plan had brought them here, and here was where they needed to be. Grady Briggs sat on the low concrete wall near the entrance with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the road. The same road Wade Donovan was not coming back down. The same road Roy Callahan's cruiser had taken an hour ago with Wade in the back seat. He watched it anyway. Because keeping vigil is not something you stop simply because the immediate danger has passed. You stop when the people you are watching over are safe. Not safe for now, safe enough to sleep. Safe enough that a 10-year-old girl doesn't have to lie awake cataloging sounds from a driveway. They weren't there yet, but they were closer than they had been when the night started. And the Iron Wolves of Harlan County, Kentucky stayed in the parking lot of the hospital and kept the cold company and watched the road and waited for morning. The morning came in gray and slow over Harlan County. The parking lot held the cold the way flat concrete always does, radiating it back upward through the soles of boots, even after the worst of the night has passed. Marcus Webb had slept 2 hours in the chair beside Claire's room and was awake before the light changed, sitting on the low concrete wall outside with a cup of coffee that had gone cold without his noticing. The sky was the pale, flat gray of a November dawn in the hills, the mountains to the east barely distinguishable from the clouds above them. Grady Briggs was still at his post near the entrance. He had been there all night. He had the stillness of a man who has decided that moving is not something he intends to do until the situation changes to his satisfaction, and the situation had not yet changed to his satisfaction. The others were in the configurations of men who have learned to rest in uncomfortable places without full sleep. Wes Decker, with his arms crossed and his chin on his chest, breathing in the even rhythm of genuine sleep despite the cold. Aldrich Reese was awake on his bike with his notebook on his knee, writing something in his compressed hand. Clint Pruitt stood at the far edge of the lot with his back to the entrance, watching the road that came in from the west. At 6:45, the attending physician cleared Claire for discharge with instructions and 3 prescriptions and a follow-up card. She would need to move carefully for 4 to 6 weeks. She would need rest. She would need to not return to the house on Sycamore Loop, which the physician stated with the directness of a professional who had learned not to soften certain recommendations. Claire said she had no intention of returning. The question of where they would go was one Marcus had worked on during the night. Not the finding that it had been a 4 a.m. phone call to Dorothy Ashe, who ran a residential property management company on Main Street and who owed the Iron Wolves a favor that was 8 years old and that nobody had ever called in. Dorothy had picked up and had not complained about the hour. The apartment was on Caldwell Street, 6 blocks from the elementary school and 4 from the nearest pharmacy, and on the opposite side of Harlan from Sycamore Loop. Second floor of a 3-story building with a back parking lot, a landlord who was not Wade Donovan. Clean, available immediately. The Iron Wolves covered the first 3 months. Nobody asked to be thanked for this. Nobody mentioned it. They moved Claire and Lily on a Saturday morning that smelled of wood smoke from a chimney somewhere on the block. There was not much worth moving. Their clothes, Lily's school things, a box of books, the drawings Lily had made, and kept in a folder, a small collection of objects that had been important enough to carry from place to place. The furniture at Sycamore Loop was Wade's furniture in every way that mattered. It held his memory in its surfaces, and neither of them wanted it. The furniture in the Caldwell Street apartment arrived from 3 different sources across the Saturday afternoon. Grady had a truck and knew 2 men with another truck, and throughout the day they brought a couch, a kitchen table with 4 chairs that didn't quite match a dresser, 2 bed frames, and a set of bookshelves that had clearly lived a long life and been painted blue at some point and partially stripped back to wood. Marcus brought mattresses still in their factory wrapping from a furniture place on the highway where he had an account. Wes Decker arrived mid-afternoon with a full car of grocery bags and carried them upstairs in 3 trips without comment and began stacking them in the kitchen cabinets in silence. Lily carried her own box of books up the stairs herself, 4 trips. On each trip back down, she pressed herself against the wall of the stairway to let the men coming up with larger things pass through. And each of them said something brief, and she said something brief back. And by the 4th trip, there was something in her that was incrementally different from the Lily who had walked into the Rusted Nail 2 nights ago. Not healed, not fully open, but moving in the direction of both. Claire watched from a kitchen chair with her right arm pressed carefully to her side and directed traffic where it needed directing. And at one point she said quietly to no one in particular, "I don't know how to repay any of this." And Grady Briggs, carrying a bookshelf through the doorway, said without breaking stride, "There's nothing to repay, ma'am." And that was the end of that conversation. Lily's room was the smaller bedroom at the back of the apartment, which suited her because it had a window that looked onto the parking lot and beyond to the backyards of the houses on the next street, where someone had left a rusted swing set standing in the dead November grass. She put her books on the shelves. She put her folder of drawings in the top drawer of the dresser. She put the small white angel plush from Aldrich Reese on the windowsill, where it leaned against the glass with its pipe cleaner halo slightly askew tilted toward the swing set. She was arranging the things on her dresser, careful, purposeful, the way she did everything when she found the nightlight. It was small, shaped like a 5-pointed star pressed glass, the kind that plugged into an outlet and cast a soft yellow-white glow in a dark room. It had been placed on the dresser surface, not wrapped or bagged, just set there to be found. Someone had plugged it in to test it and then unplugged it and left it out. She picked it up. She turned it over in both hands. "I've never had a nightlight before," she said. She said it to herself mostly. But the door was open and Wes Decker was in the hallway with an armload of hangers, and he heard it. He set the hangers on the floor outside her door. He leaned against the door frame and looked at her, standing at the dresser with the star in both hands. "You do now, princess," he said. She looked at him, then at the nightlight. Then she went to the outlet beside the dresser and plugged it in, and the star glowed warm and steady in the November gray of the small room, and she looked at it for a while without saying anything else. She didn't need to say anything else. The days moved differently after that. Not easily easy was not what they were not yet. There was the arraignment on Monday of the following week. Callahan pushed for remand and got it. Wade Donovan sat in Harlan County detention without bail, while the charges assembled into a weight he was not going to lift. The fraudulent guardianship order traced back to a notary whose license had been revoked in 2019, and the judge whose name appeared on the document had retired under circumstances that state oversight was still examining. Wade would have time to sit with all of it. Claire went to her follow-up appointments. She moved carefully and rested and allowed herself to be taken care of, which was harder than the moving carefully. She had spent so long in a state of sustained vigilance that the absence of it left a specific kind of exhaustion. Not the tiredness of activity, but the tiredness of held tension, finally releasing the way a muscle surprises you when it finally lets go after being clenched so long you'd forgotten it was clenched. She slept longer than she had in years. She ate the food that appeared in her kitchen. She let Lily sit beside her on the couch in the evenings doing homework at the coffee table, and she watched her daughter work through long division problems with the same focused seriousness Lily applied to everything, and she thought about who this child had become and what it had cost her. Lily went back to school on Wednesday. She walked the 6 blocks by herself because she was 10 years old and the school was 6 blocks away, and she had been navigating much larger distances alone for a long time. But on Wednesday morning, Wes Decker happened to be on Caldwell Street at 7:45, on his way to somewhere entirely unrelated, and he happened to ride slowly along the sidewalk for 6 blocks with his engine at idle, and he happened to be on that same street again at 3:15 when school let out. He did this for a week. Neither of them mentioned it. On Friday of that first week, Aldrich Reese came to the apartment alone in the morning when Lily was at school and Claire was resting. He knocked twice. He was carrying a metal box roughly the size of a shoebox, dull gray, with a padlock that was no longer locked. He had addressed the padlock himself with tools before coming. He set it on the kitchen table. Claire came out of the bedroom. She looked at the box. She looked at Aldrich. "I went back to the house," he said, "to get the rest of your things. There's a space beside the water heater in the kitchen behind the access panel." He was quiet for a moment. He had nailed it shut, not secured it, nailed it with finishing nails, the kind you're not meant to see. Claire looked at the box. "I thought you should have it before anyone else," Aldrich said. He stepped back, put his hands in his jacket pockets, and looked out the window at Caldwell Street. Claire sat down at the kitchen table. She put her hands flat on the surface on either side of the box. She sat that way for a minute, breathing the way she breathed when she was managing pain, carefully, deliberately. Then she opened the box. 23 letters, 18 postcards. All of them in the same handwriting, all addressed to Claire Harper at the Sycamore Loop address. Some had money folded inside 20s and 50s, the kind of amount that represents a significant share of a military pay allotment sent month after month, with the consistency of someone who intends to keep doing this for as long as it takes. Some had photographs. A man in military fatigues in a dusty, sun-bleached landscape squinting into light that came from the left. The same man in a recreation room somewhere writing something at a table. The same man holding up a handmade sign in black marker that read, "Lily counting the days." Corbett Wynn, overseas, for 2 years, writing every month, every single month. Claire read the first letter twice. Then she set it down precisely and looked at the table surface for a very long time, and in that silence she was doing something that Aldrich was too respectful to observe directly. He went to the window and let her have the privacy of it. The letter said what letters from difficult and distant places say. He hoped she was well-hoped, Lily was well-hoped things were easier than they had been. He was sorry he wasn't there. Being sorry didn't do anything useful about that fact. He was putting money in because he knew things were tight. "Tell Lily I'm thinking about her every day." It was the third letter dated 14 months ago that undid her. She had been managing, reading the first two with the controlled attention she had learned to apply to difficult information. And then she reached the third and read, "I don't understand why you haven't written back. I know things are hard, and I know I don't have the right to expect anything. But I need to know Lily is okay. Please, if you can't write anything else, just write that she's okay." He thought she hadn't written back. He had spent 14 months believing that Claire had chosen not to respond to him. He had sent money and photographs and a handmade sign reading, "Counting the days." And he had heard nothing because the man who had moved into the house had taken every envelope from the mailbox before Claire could see. It had added them to a metal box behind a nailed panel and had constructed in Corbett Wynn's mind the silence of a woman who had decided to move on. And in Claire's mind, the silence of a man who had. Claire sat at the kitchen table with a letter written 14 months ago by a man in Afghanistan, and she stopped managing entirely, and she cried in a way she had not cried in longer than 2 years, without trying to control it or contain it, without thinking about what came next. Aldrich Reese went quietly to the kitchen and made coffee and set a cup in front of her without being asked, and went back to the window. He stayed until she was done. That evening, Claire sat on the edge of Lily's bed, and Lily sat beside her, and Claire told her daughter the truth. Not all of it, not in terms that would require a 10-year-old to understand the specific mechanics of how adults manage their fear, or what it means when a man nails a panel shut over a metal box. She told Lily the parts that mattered most. "Your father did not leave. He is overseas. He is a soldier. He has been writing to us for 2 years, and I didn't know because The letters never reached me. They found the letters, all of them. He never stopped. Lily was quiet for a long time after Claire said this. She sat with her hands in her lap, looking at the star nightlight on the dresser, its warm, steady glow. She looked at it the way she had looked at the bike inscription, with the full, careful attention of someone reading something important for the first time. Then she said, I knew. Claire looked at her. I knew he didn't leave like that, Lily said. People don't leave like that. She reached past Claire and opened the top drawer of the dresser and took out her folder of drawings. Near the back was a photograph worn soft at the edges from handling a man with Lily's dark eyes holding a blue bicycle with both hands grinning. He took that picture the day he gave me the bike. He made me promise to keep it. She looked at the photograph. He said the picture and the bike were his way of staying with us, even if he had to go far away. He said even if he couldn't be there in person, those things would be. She put the photograph carefully back in the folder. I figured he was somewhere he couldn't come back from yet. I just didn't know where. Claire put her arm around her daughter and held her, and neither of them said anything else for a while. And the star nightlight glowed on the dresser in the dark room, and the swing set was visible through the window in the yellow glow from the parking lot below. That night, Lily read the letters. All of them. She sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor with her back against the bed going through them, in order oldest to newest, with the photograph of Corbett on the floor beside her for reference, and the star nightlight making the room warm and possible. She read each letter completely before moving to the next. She did not skim. She did not rush. She did not crunch. She read with the same gravity she had brought to everything in the plan she had carried for 4 months, the walk down Cutter's Road the moment she had stepped through the door of the Rusted Nail. The same quality of attention. Like someone for whom words mean exactly what they say, and who therefore gives them everything they are owed. When she finished the last one, she sat for a while longer. Then she put them all back in order, aligned the edges, and held the stack in her lap. She looked at the star nightlight. The star glowed. She put the letters in the top drawer under the folder of drawings and turned off the overhead light and left the nightlight on and got into bed and slept straight through until morning without waking, for the first time and longer than she could clearly remember. A week after they moved to Caldwell Street, Marcus Webb came to the apartment on a Tuesday morning with the blue bicycle. It had been gone for 8 days. The chain had been replaced, the tires were new, the cables replaced to the brakes, adjusted the handlebars, straightened, and fitted with new grips. The paint was the same blue matched carefully, the exact same shade with the scuffs repainted smooth. On the down tube in white letters done by someone who had taken their time with it, Lily Ride Free. The inscription on the top tube was untouched. For Lily, ride toward the light. Always. CBW, the small, carefully scratched letters still in the metal, still catching the light at the same angle they always had. Lily stood in the doorway of the apartment and looked at the bike for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus. He was standing in the cold morning air, holding the bike by the handlebars, and his expression was the expression of a man who has done something and is entirely at peace with having done it. She came down the 3 porch steps. She ran her thumb along the new lettering on the down tube. She put her finger on the inscription on the top tube and traced it once. Then she looked up at him. The bell, she said. He looked at the handlebars. On the left grip was a small bell, bright pink, the kind that rang with a clean light sound when the lever was flicked. She reached out and flicked it. It rang once in the cold November air of Caldwell Street, clean and certain. Lily looked at it for a moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around Marcus Webb's waist and pressed her face into his leather vest and held on. He held her back, both hands gently the way you hold something that has been through a great deal and is still standing, and you want to make sure it knows that it is held. You saved us, she said, muffled by leather, clear. He was quiet for a moment. Sweetheart, he said, you saved yourself the second you walked through that door. She pulled back enough to look up at him. You just needed somewhere to walk into, he said. She considered this with the seriousness she gave to things that mattered. Then she nodded once. With a nod, she had the one that meant a thing had been received correctly and would be kept. He gave her the bike. She rode it up and down Caldwell Street 3 times before coming back inside the pink bell ringing at each end of the block. 9 days after the bike came back, Marcus Webb came to the apartment earlier than usual. He came alone. Sheriff Roy Callahan had left something at the station for him when Marcus had stopped in for preliminary hearing paperwork, a cream-colored envelope with his name on the front, in handwriting he didn't recognize, and on the back, in the same hand, forwarded. Via Family Readiness Office, U.S. Army Special Forces deployed rotation Afghanistan theater. He had carried it for 2 days without opening it. He opened it on a Wednesday evening alone in the front room of his house off Cutter's Road, in a chair by the window with the lamp on. He read it. It was 4 paragraphs on lined paper in the same careful hand that had scratched initials into the metal of a bicycle frame. The first paragraph said he had been notified through his chain of command that a Sheriff Roy Callahan in Harlan County, Kentucky, had submitted paperwork related to an incident involving Claire Harper and his daughter Lily, and that a man named Wade Donovan had been taken into custody. He said he had sat with this information for 3 days before he could write. He said he didn't have the language for what he felt when he read what had happened, and he had always considered himself a man of reasonable words. The second paragraph said he had been sending letters for 2 years. He said he had eventually forced himself to assume that Claire had made a choice about her life that didn't include him, and that he had to respect that choice even when it was the hardest thing he'd done. It had been very hard. He had kept sending the letters anyway because not sending them felt like giving Lily up, and giving Lily up was not something he was capable of. The third paragraph said he was currently on his final rotation and he was coming home in 4 months. Home meaning Kentucky, meaning Harlan County, meaning whatever would be waiting for him there that he had not expected to find. The fourth paragraph was short. It said, "Please, if there is any way to tell Lily, please tell her that her dad never stopped thinking about her. Not for a single day. Not for a single hour. Tell her the message in the bottle was always true." Marcus read it. Then he read it again. He sat in the chair by the window for a long time after that. Outside, Cutter's Road was empty and dark the way it was most nights past 9 o'clock. The lamp made a warm circle, and he sat inside it and held a 4-paragraph letter from a man who had been writing to his daughter for 2 years from the other side of the world, and who had kept writing even when the silence from home told him it might be pointless because the writing was the last connection, and he was not willing to cut it. Marcus thought about a Tuesday afternoon in April 12 years ago. He thought about a coroner's voice coming through water. He thought about the sentence that lived underneath everything. He had not been anywhere near that room. He folded the letter carefully along its original creases. He put it back in the envelope. He held the envelope in both hands for a moment. Then he got up and put on his jacket. Sunday morning came in with light. Real light, not November's usual gray approximation, but actual low-angle winter sunlight, the kind that found its way under the cloud line and made everything it touched glow briefly amber. Caldwell Street was quiet. The rusted swing set in the yard behind the apartment building caught the morning light on its frame, and for a moment it looked almost gold, the way old things sometimes do when the light finds them at the right angle. Marcus came around the side of the building to the small back porch where the blue bicycle was kept, leaned against the railing secured with a lock. He unlocked it. He took the envelope from his jacket pocket. He tucked it under the brake cable on the left side of the handlebars on the side, with the pink bell angled so the cold air would not take it. He went to the bottom of the back stairs and leaned against the railing. He waited. He was not entirely sure what he planned to say when the moment came. He had been turning that over since Wednesday evening and had not arrived at an answer. Some things do not have the answer in advance. You have to be in them before the right words show up, if they show up at all. At 8:47, by the clock on his phone, the back door of the apartment opened, and Lily came out in her jacket and her pink sneakers, the rubber edges cleaned white. Her hair was loose this morning, not braided. She was carrying the small white angel plush from Aldrich Reese the way children carry certain objects without thinking about the carrying. She came down the stairs. She was 3 steps from the bottom when she saw the envelope on the bike. She stopped. She stood on the step and looked at it. She recognized the handwriting. Before she reached for it, she had read that handwriting carefully and completely a week ago. 23 letters and 18 postcards in order, oldest to newest, sitting on her bedroom floor with the star nightlight glowing in the photograph of Corbett beside her. She knew that hand. She came down the last 3 steps. She took the envelope from the handlebars. She opened it. She unfolded the 4 paragraphs. She read them in the winter sunlight on the back porch of the Caldwell Street apartment building, standing completely still, the angel plush hanging from her left hand at her side. She read it once. Then she went back and read the 4th paragraph again. The message in the bottle was always true. She stood with the letter in both hands and looked at the yard, at the rusted swing set glowing in the morning light, at the bare trees behind it and the sky behind them, pale blue and clear, going up without any visible limit. She stood there for a while. Then she turned and looked at Marcus Webb, who was leaning against the porch railing with his hands in his jacket pockets. She looked at him for a long time. She did not cry. She looked at him with eyes that had been watching the world carefully for a long time and drawing conclusions from everything they found. And what they were seeing now was a 58-year-old man who had lost his daughter 12 years ago and had carried that loss every day since, and who had received a letter from a soldier on a Wednesday evening and had spent 2 days holding it before getting up on a Sunday morning and placing it on a bicycle. She nodded. Just once. Small, certain. The nod of a child whose world has finally assembled itself into something that holds together. Not without damage, not perfectly, but together the pieces in the right places, the whole structure sound in the way that structures can be sound after they have been tested. Marcus nodded back. That was all that needed to be said about it. By summer, Lily Harper was unrecognizable. Not in her face and not in those eyes. Those were the same, the watching serious eyes that had walked into the Rusted Nail on a November night with a plan and $2.37 in a frayed pink ribbon. But the set of her shoulders had changed. The way she moved through a space had changed. She no longer checked the corners of rooms when she entered them. That small, involuntary scan that children develop when they have learned that rooms can change without warning. She moved through spaces with the easy ownership of someone who has decided that the space belongs to her as much as it belongs to anyone. She laughed now, not cautiously, not with the controlled, small smile she had given Marcus in the doorway of the bar the night the engines roared, and she told herself not to be afraid. She laughed fully from the chest, with her whole face involved the way children are supposed to laugh before they learn to hold things back. The Iron Wolves annual summer cookout was held on the last Saturday of June on the field behind the Rusted Nail, where the grass was worn in patches from years of use and the trees at the edge provided good shade in the afternoon heat. There were folding tables and a large grill and music from speakers set on a picnic table. There were children from other families and older men who had ridden in from other chapters, and a great deal of food and a great deal of noise, in the particular warmth of a late June afternoon in the Kentucky hills when the light is long and the air smells of wood smoke and cut grass. Lily had the blue bicycle. She had been riding it since November. She was better on it now, the way children improve at things when they have space to practice without being afraid when falling doesn't mean anything except try again. She had worked out how to take the slight downhill slope from the parking lot to the field at speed and manage the transition from asphalt to grass without losing control, and she was running this experiment repeatedly with the focused testing energy of someone solving a problem that interests her. The bell rang every time she hit the transition point. The Iron Wolves cheered every time she hit it. Not politely, not with the restrained appreciation of adults watching a child do something mildly interesting. They cheered like she was competing in something where the outcome was genuinely uncertain, like everything depended on her making that transition cleanly. Grady Briggs cupped both hands around his mouth. Clint Pruitt put two fingers between his teeth and produced a sound that carried across the whole field. Wes Decker, who was usually so quiet, made a noise that did not seem to belong to a man of his typical decibel level. Lily grinned and circled back for another run. Claire stood near the edge of the field with Grady beside her, arms crossed, watching. She had healed well. The ribs had finished their business. The kidney was fine. The older fractures had been formally documented and were now part of a legal record that Wade Donovan's attorney was finding very difficult to work around. She had a job at the school district administrative part-time, which had the useful quality of putting her in the same building as Lily for most of the school day. She was sleeping, she was cooking, she was making small decisions, what to have for breakfast, which way to walk, with a freedom that still surprised her sometimes, like a door that had been stuck for a long time, and then opens easily one day, and you stand there for a moment just feeling the difference. She sleeps straight through now, Claire said. Every night, no nightmares. Grady Briggs watched Lily cut across the field on the blue bike, the pink bell ringing clean in the summer air. That's what a kid should do, he said. Marcus Webb was standing slightly apart from the main gathering with a cup of coffee watching Lily make another run at the slope. He had a way of being at events like this present, but not central watching without being removed from it. He looked at the field and the light and the girl on the blue bicycle and the men around him who had ridden out on a November night because a 10-year-old had walked into their bar with a plan. Grady came to stand beside him. They watched Lily stand up on the pedals at the far end of the field, turning hard in the grass, coming back around at speed. "You think she'll be okay," Grady said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She already is," he said. Grady looked at him. "How can you tell?" Marcus watched her coming back across the field faster now, the bell ringing as she hit the transition, the bikers beginning to cheer before she was even halfway through it. The sun was low and warm in the late afternoon, the kind of light that makes everything it finds briefly beautiful. The blue paint caught it. The white letters caught it. The pink bell caught it and held it for a moment as she turned in the grass. "Because now she knows something powerful," Marcus said. Grady waited. "She knows that family isn't blood." Marcus watched her arc across the field with the bell ringing and the sun on the blue bike. It's who shows up when your whole world is falling apart. At the edge of the lot, a little apart from the rest, Clint Pruitt stood with a beer he hadn't touched in 20 minutes and watched Lily ride. He had grown up 3 doors from a house on Sycamore Loop. He had heard things through thin walls that a child had no business hearing. He had left Harlan County at 18, telling himself he was leaving all of it behind. And he had been wrong about that. The way you are wrong about things that are built into you completely and without the option of revision. You didn't leave those sounds, you carried them. He watched Lily ring the bell at the bottom of the slope and grin at the noise the bikers made. He watched her circle back for another pass. He watched the grin, which was not cautious and not controlled and did not cost her anything. Something in him, something he had been holding since he was 8 years old on a street not far from here. Listening to sounds through walls in the middle of the night released. Not all at once and not completely, but enough. Enough that he noticed the release and registered what had caused it and stood with it for a moment before letting it settle where it needed to settle. He watched Lily Harper ride her blue bike across the summer field and ring her pink bell and laugh. He picked up his beer. The engines of 8 Harleys started up one by one in the parking lot behind the gathering. Not to leave, not yet, not while the afternoon was still warm and the field was full. Just to be alive, to make the sound that the afternoon had been building toward. The sound that had frightened her once in the doorway of a November bar and that now made her look up with her whole face open. Lily heard the engines. She stood up on the pedals. She rang the bell. And then she laughed the full, unchained laugh of a child who has been given back to herself after a long time away from that gift. And she chased the sound of those engines across the summer field with everything she had, her wheels taking the worn grass, the pink bell ringing in the warm Kentucky air, the white letters catching the late sun. Lily ride free. At the edge of the field, Claire wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Not from grief, the way you wipe your eyes when something is so far on the right side of things that your face doesn't know what else to do with the fullness of it. She smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had spent too many seasons in a house that did not allow that expression, and who had discovered in the months since that the smile had not gone anywhere. It had been waiting, right where she'd left it, back before the waiting started, patient in the way that true things are patient. The engines rumbled, the bell rang. The field was full of summer and light, and the sound of men who had shown up when it mattered and stayed when staying was required. Lily Harper rode free, and 4 months after that Sunday morning, when a girl found a letter on a bicycle handlebar and nodded at a man who had carried the weight of the wrong absence for 12 years, a soldier named Corbett Wynn came home to Harlan County, Kentucky. He had 4 months of back pay in his account and a duffel bag over one shoulder and the address of a Caldwell Street apartment on a piece of paper in his pocket given to him by a sheriff who had kept a 2-year file and knew when to pass things along. He had not called ahead. He had not known what to say. He stood on the sidewalk in front of the building for a long moment looking at the second-floor windows. Then he went up the front steps and knocked. It was Lily who answered the door. She looked at him. He looked at her. She had his eyes. He had her seriousness. They stood like that for 3 seconds, or 5 of the same 3 to 5 second pause that the people who mattered in Lily Harper's life had learned was not hesitation, but consideration. The space she gave herself before she was ready to speak. She didn't speak. She stepped forward and put her arms around him, and he dropped the duffel bag on the porch and held his daughter in the doorway of the Caldwell Street apartment. And neither of them said anything for a long time, and the star nightlight was still on in her room, glowing warm through the open bedroom door behind them, because she had started leaving it on all the time, not because she needed it anymore, but because she had decided she liked it. She liked the light. She had always been someone who could find the light even when the finding required walking 40 minutes in November cold with a bicycle and a plan and $2.37. She had always known how to ride toward it.